Extinguished participants, welcome to our atelier gatherings. Today we have a special guest, Wolfgang Schwan from the United States. He is in Ankara for attending war journalism. He is well known with his photo taken during the Ukraine war. He took off a photo of an old lady which has become the symbol of the war. He will be back in Ukraine when he completes his training in Ankara. Wolfgang Schwan is a documentary photographer currently based in Philadelphia with his dog Thor. He is a member of NPPA and the Curious Society. He had his photos published in various media outlets such as Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Telegraph, and New York Times. He is also working as a freelance photojournalist for Anadolu Agency. Now I want to invite him to the stage and he will make a speech there. Then we will have a question and answer session. Please.
Thank you. This is on, cool. Thank you everyone for coming out. I'm Wolfgang Schwan, like she just said, I'm from Philadelphia. So I'm gonna just quickly introduce myself and talk about what led up to the photo. So I got into photography about 4 or 5 years ago, and I've been into documentary photography for about 2 years. I started doing that during the protest summer in the United States about in 2020, and felt that making photos of spot news really attracted me, and helping to tell a story day by day. That's been more of my focus throughout documentary photography than like the long form. But deciding to come to Ukraine in this last year, this was my first time in the country. I wanted to look at a place in the world where there was a lot of history that I was curious about. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has been going on for 1,000 years, most notably in the past since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So since 1990 is kind of like what I wanted to learn a lot more about, and the issues between the two places. So in November this last year, the Russian forces began to build up on the border. I took the opportunity to go and work along the front line with Anadolu here and kind of work as spot news, but simultaneously get to learn more about why the conflict was happening, the history of that from civilians on the ground, from the soldiers on the ground. I ended up doing much more of the daily life of soldiers for most of January, all of February, leading up to the first day of the war. I'd spent all that time in Donbass. So I'm going to... Can we get the slideshow up? Can we get the slideshow? So I'm just going to go through a few of the photos from January and February while I had... Boop, boop, boop, boop, boop. 1 second. So in Donbass, most of the time that we'd spent, we would do 2 to 5 days hanging out with the same soldiers. And doing the longer stretches, I found that you would get much more intimate shots and you would learn the lives of the young men and women that are defending the front line from the separatist forces in Donetsk and Luhansk. So here in Zorluklar, technical difficulties. We stayed with these guys for about a week in Zorluklar. This is in currently occupied Russian area. We moved all along over the course of these 2 months from Stansia Luhansk, which is all the way to the north along the Russian border, all the way down to Mariupol. And over the course of that month, it was really crucial for me to learn why these young men had joined the military, why they were fighting there. This war since 2014 has been going on. And to a lot of the world, this seemed like a stale conflict. Not much action was happening. Here and there would be artillery fire going back and forth, but it was a very stagnant front line since 2015. So I wanted to learn why there's still the interest to do this, why there's the threat, and learn about the looming threat of a Russian invasion. And Many of the folks that I talked to, civilians, soldiers, other journalists, academia, the consensus was that it wouldn't happen. The risk reward didn't seem like it would be there for Russia. It didn't make a lot of sense economically, militarily. It seemed like Russia wouldn't have too hard of a time with the Ukrainian military, much to everyone's surprise now. But most people felt that this wouldn't happen. And the reason for this that I concluded was that there had been these buildups every single year since 2015. And to a Ukrainian living there, you watch this happen year after year, and the invasion doesn't happen. You can't just continue to worry yourself to death for your entire life. So it sort of turned into a boy that cried wolf story, I believe. And here is another area along the front line. So this is Zolitaire as well. I'm just going to flip through these. So anyway, we did about 40 days of this sort of thing, and then we get to around February 19th, leading up to the war, a lot of pieces started moving very quickly. The Russian forces began to move closer to the front line. Shelling began along the front line, pretty much coordinated from top to bottom. So it seemed that things, in fact, would start. And Putin had made his speech recognizing the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. So I, along with two colleagues, Alex Laurie and Justin Yao, we began moving back from, sorry about that, we began to kind of make a plan in Bakhmut, which is where I had been staying for 2 months, which is kind of centrally located in the Donbass area. We decided that if the war does break out, we would head to Kharkiv and then to Kiev, being the two of the bigger cities. We felt that this is where the story would be and like the most important place for us to be. Also not wanting to stay directly on the front line when the Russian army invades. At the time, the thinking was that the Russian army would be vastly superior to Ukraine and would just steamroll straight through the front line, so that's not the smartest place to be. On the morning of February 24th, we got messages, woke up at about 4 a.m., took our plan into action to head to Kharkiv. So the three of us loaded our car. It was packed with all of our suitcases, body armor, everything. I think that Justin was sitting on top of a suitcase in the back of the car with like his head smashed into the roof. We headed up towards Kharkiv, and along the drive about 1 hour south of the city, we approached Chigoyev, which is a little suburb to the south. And on the horizon, this might be like 6, 7 a.m., we saw a huge plume of smoke, and through looking at Google Maps and just figuring out the direction, it seemed to be a Ukrainian airfield. And we came to the conclusion that Russian missile probably struck this airfield. We're going to try to get a landscape with like the sun rising photo of that scene. And while we were searching for a road to get into that direction, we pulled into one of these older Khrushchev-style Soviet bloc apartment sort of complexes, and EMS was beginning to respond. There was smoke. We had just stumbled on a very recent missile strike. So we get out of the car. We see this scene. It must have been an Iskander or Calibre missile of some sort, one of the cruise missiles. And it left, this is about like a 20-meter wide hole in the ground that I'm assuming struck a water main in between the two buildings. And it left extensive damage on the buildings on either side. And immediately after this is when this photo was made. Olena here was the first civilian that had approached us. And the three of us were all together, Justin, Alex, and myself, and we each snapped a few photos of her. We asked her name, profession, her age. She had already been bandaged a little bit, so she had had some medical care. I don't know if that was from medical services, but after we had a very brief interaction with her and got her details, she headed in the direction of first aid responders. At which point we continued to work the developing scene there. So we moved around the apartment complex. This is a man who had lost his, I believe it was his brother. I have it in a caption somewhere, but He had lost a family member, and this is another family member that's weeping behind him. It later turned out that this was possibly the first casualties of the war as far as civilians go. So this is inside of one of the buildings. We did a lot of just running up and down with the first responders. So the police would run into these buildings, and because of the shell shock of this large missile, many of the doorways were slightly ajar or bent, and they couldn't get doors open, so the police would have to go in and they would kick open the doors and hopefully find individuals inside. And if they needed medical help, the police would get them out. So this is one of the police officers breaking down a door and helping an elderly man come outside who had had a very deep laceration or cut on the back of his leg. So for the rest of the morning, we had kind of just moved around this apartment building and took a handful of photos inside of the buildings. And both of these are obviously where children live and had their whole world turned upside down that day, as much of the country did. Excuse me. So, for the rest of the day, we left Chigoyev. We went to Kharkov. We all filed our photos that day. Sent them into Anadolu. I made an Instagram post with that, and I don't know if this is working. I can just talk loud enough. But so we had sent in the photos, and then we embarked to drive out to Kiev. And it ended up being about like a 12-hour drive because the entire highway system in Ukraine was gridlocked from everyone trying to move west into Poland, into Romania. So we had to take back roads the whole way and didn't have a whole lot of cell phone reception. So I didn't really know until the end of the day how widespread these photos from the morning had gone. We would here and there hit like a little pocket of cell reception, and I would get a whole bunch of notifications from colleagues from Sarap and Iper here on what was happening in the rest of the country. We would quickly check Twitter. At the time, it seemed that watching Twitter, watching any of the news, it looked like the sky was falling, like all of Ukraine is falling apart. It was very hard to keep a realistic image of what the scene was on the ground all over the place. So it came as a very big shock to me that this photo was as widely circulated as it was, because at the time my thinking was what we had witnessed this morning is likely happening in every city and most towns all along the border with Russia, that there would be thousands of images similar to this. As it turned out, fortunately on like the opening day of the war, there weren't many civilian casualties, and we had just stumbled upon one of them. So this photo circulated around the world. We'll go back to her. The photo of Elena, as you've all seen, circulated around the world. She sort of became the face of conflict, and I felt very, very humbled to have participated in helping tell the story, helping show the world from the onset that there would be civilian casualties, that one of the groups of people deepest hurt by this conflict would be civilians. And I think from the opening hour of the war, this photo going around, I don't think that for the world there was any way to avoid that that's what it was going to be. And I think fortunately for Ukraine, most of the photos since then that have come out have been centered around the civilian travesties throughout this entire war. This is one where you don't see many of the guys in camouflage holding up the AK-47s. Most of the images and the videos and the content coming out of this conflict are civilian-centered. And part of that is that Russia has no issue in targeting civilian areas. That's a tactic that they widely use. But I think that the international community of journalists is doing a tremendous job helping to show how brutal this war is, not just for the soldiers along the front line, but mainly for the population of Ukraine. So that's my presentation. I don't know if I took up enough time, but we would like to do a few, if anyone has questions, that would be great. I'm here to answer them. Do you need a translator?
Hello, welcome. How was your first experience in your first foreign destination? Was Ukraine your first foreign destination in your career?
So Ukraine was the first conflict I've worked in, the first sort of war zone I've worked in. I've traveled a bit around the world, but as far as working for the news and doing documentary photography on like a daily spot news sort of basis, this is my first experience doing that in a foreign country.
Okay, and with which kind of problems you were confronted generally, and which was the hardest problem which you should solve?
That's interesting. So I think there's a lot of problem solving when you're living and working in another country, and when you have to do the sort of like the spot news, the daily news is what I do with Anadolu. So it's every day you're trying to find images and stories that are going to be marketable to the international news media for that day, for that week. So it's our job to seek that out, sort of anticipate that, what is going to be the center of the news. So you have to be very on the balls of your feet and move around a lot. So like one of the challenges is in wartime finding places to stay. Is there a hotel? Is there a bed and breakfast? Do we need to make friends through friends and find someone's bedroom that we can sleep on, or like a living room that we can sleep on the floor in this town or village or city? Gas or benzene is a big issue in the country, or it was at the beginning of the war, where we would have to, there's a 5 or 10 liter limit on how much you can take. So there was a few times where we drove across the country and there's a 5 liter limit, and that basically gives you hopefully enough to get to the next benzene station, and we would run out of gas. Luckily, Ukraine is a very like hitchhiking friendly country, so like you stand out on the side of the road and usually the first car will pick you up and then take you on the way, then you get gas, come back, do the same thing again. So I think just the logistics of like moving throughout a conflict zone is something that you might not think about before going, but it was a challenge day to day to kind of just line everything up. This is sort of just like 1% of the job, and all of like the logistics, the planning, the trying to find contacts, what you're going to go take photos of is the majority of the time spent in these situations. And then it just takes 1 second to make a photo. Over here. You just talk a little louder and you're good. This isn't working either, so we're fine.
Considering your time in service as a journalist, in which moment you would find the most difficult one and most extreme?
Most extreme, I mean, we had a very bad run-in at a checkpoint at one point in Kharkov where I had been out working the entire day. We had gone to Malarahan outside of the city, which was a recently liberated village, and photographed there for a few hours, and then we did a little bit on people who had been using basements as shelters. When we got back to the city that day, I had to drop off the translator that I was using, and we, unknowingly to us, drove right past a metro station that had been bombed maybe a day or two beforehand, and there was a rule that we didn't know about that no journalists were allowed at this metro station, and there's a checkpoint immediately out front. So we drove into this, and it very quickly became an issue on why are journalists here when there's a rule that they're not. So the mood was very aggressive from the soldiers. We were like pulled out of the car as like AKs were like, rounds were chambered. We had guns pointed at us, and it was like 15 minutes of like trying to diffuse the situation verbally. But that was a little bit, that was the only time that I had my camera taken from me, and most of the photos from the day were deleted and combed through. So there's situations like that as long as you have, you yourself speak the language, or you have a translator that has a cool head and can help diffuse it. I think that was one of the more face-to-face extreme moments that I had dealt with there.
Any others?
Thanks, Wolfgang, for the presentation and the experience that you shared with us. I have just a question regarding this photo and the situation over there, because we were in the same time both in Donbass and Kiev in Ukraine when the war started. And you have both aspects at the same time. So you're a human being and you're facing that there are lots of wounded and injured people around you, and at the same time you're a professional, that you have to do your job as best as it's possible, right? Taking the photos, doing your professional job, did you have any chance to assist or help someone maybe injured or other people? Because the one side and other, the human aspect or the specter and the professional, sometimes there is a conflict between them, because you have to decide which one is to prioritize and etc. So did you have any chance to probably help or assist? Or because I faced myself that even financially, some journalists were trying to help the people who are stuck over there, all their world is collapsed on them. So, did you have any chance to?
Of course.
This?
I mean, there's many situations. I mean, this day with Olena, there wasn't much that we needed to do to help. She had some injuries to her head, and none of us are qualified to deal with that. So we pointed her in the direction of the first aid responders who are much more qualified to deal with that. When we went into all of the buildings, some of the doors that were jammed and wouldn't go down, I and my colleagues assisted the police officers in kicking those doors down. And there was a handful of individuals in the building who had their legs injured, like the man who had his leg was gashed that I had the photo of, and another woman who had been standing in front of a window, and glass had come in, it cut both of her eyes. She wasn't able to see. Like, we assisted them in walking down the stairs from like the 5th floor coming down. At this point, there's already medical professionals there who are much better off to deal with someone than we are. So there's lots of situations where it's our job to go there. It's our job to photograph. But yes, we are still human. And as long as I'm still there doing my job, I have no issue assisting in the scene or doing whatever it is that I can. If it's helping give some of my limited medical experience to someone, or if there was many days on this last trip this summer where we would accompany sort of like an escort to pull people out of the Donbass region and then take them down to the train in Pokrovsk to leave Donetsk province. And the shuttle bus or the van that was picking up 15 people would run out of room, and we would throw 3 babushkas in the back of our car and drive them out. So in a lot of these situations, you're sort of human first and then make photos second.
What do you think about the speech of Putin, where he said that in Ukraine is a Nazi group, and that is the reason of the war? What is your opinion about this speech of him?
You're talking about the one right before the war started? You're talking about the speech right before the war began?
Yes.
I think it was a lot of any reason that he could throw out there for why this invasion was necessary. I think that as far as like the Nazi claim, Ukraine does have far-right groups. A lot of countries in the world have far-right groups. I come from the United States, where there's an entire far-right group that has been voting for the same character in office the last few years. It's an issue that the entire world faces. I think that Putin took advantage of that to sort of magnify that issue and maybe blow it out of proportion, maybe make it seem like it was bigger than it actually is. But it gave him justification amongst the public of Russia for why they're doing this. As we've all seen, there's plenty of members of Wagner Group, of the Russian military, that we've all seen photos of, that they have swastika tattoos as well. So it's a little bit ironic at times when you see that this group that has some swastikas tattooed on them are going to fight the Nazis in another country. And it's a lot of like the finger pointing. But I do think that Ukraine overall does not have an issue with this. I think that Zelensky, the president, being awarded most influential Jew of the year is a good sign that the country is not slipping into fascism. It is, I think, one of the more more open and progressively driven countries that I've visited. Since 2014, like the country has made a major leap forward in progressiveness. But yeah, I think that speech was alarming on a lot of levels, not just for that. It was like the complete rewriting of history between Russia and Ukraine. And it became apparent that Putin during COVID had spent many months in isolation and kind of like rewrote a history in his own head on what he wanted between Ukraine and Russia, with his claim of Russia being older than Kiev, or Moscow being older than Kiev, which is just, anyone can look that up online, that Kiev predates Moscow by almost 1,000 years. So hopefully that answered some of that.
Thank you. And how active is the Wagner Group in Ukraine? And also, did you saw some children soldiers from the Russian army in Ukraine? So which are 15 or 16 years old?
So for Wagner Group, I haven't interacted with any of them. So working as a journalist on the Ukrainian side, this isn't a war where you get to witness like the up-close battles. Most of it is trench warfare. There's artillery being fired from either direction. So when there is fighting, the enemy is like 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers away, and they're just shelling from a distance. So you'll be in a trench with Ukrainian soldiers, so you don't really get to see the up-close sort of action that happens. In the news and online sources with intelligence, what Wagner seems to be doing is they are the ones on the offense in the entire Bakhmut front, kind of above Svitlodarsk and like below Zolotaire, centering on Bakhmut. It's really interesting that a mercenary group is sort of spearheading and the frontline soldiers for a major military force, and that the actual military isn't being used for that purpose. As far as the child soldiers, I have not personally seen anything of that. I mean, there may be kids that are 16 or 17 that join, maybe they get mobilized. That's not out of the realm of possibilities. I know like in many countries, when there's a war and it seems just to you, you want to go fight when you're a kid. I have heard many stories in the United States in World War II. There was 17-year-old kids that forged how old they were on their birth certificate, and then they went and fought. So I don't know if you're indicating or saying that you saw something where they were mobilized or they were forced to go in. I haven't seen anything like that. Okay,
thank you. And what is your opinion about the war? How will it end? How will it continue, the war between Russia and Ukraine?
I don't think there's a way to know now. I think that if you just went by morale and how the soldiers seem to feel on both sides, I think that the Ukrainians are very enthusiastic to continue fighting and to reclaim every inch of their land with Donetsk, Luhansk, all of the territories that were just officially annexed by Russia. I think that they want to and likely will take back Crimea. On the Russian side, it doesn't seem like it's so much of a just cause for being there. It's not their nation that they are protecting from an invader. And one of the common sayings that goes around is, if Putin stops this war, the war is over. If Putin stops fighting, the war is over. If Ukraine stops fighting, Ukraine's no longer a nation. So I think that for a lot of Ukrainians, this is like the most important thing, is to keep fighting. But there's all of these, Russia keeps doing the nuclear bomb saber rattling, that they keep making these threats. So there's always possibility that there's an escalation in things. Russia just mobilized, they're mobilizing up to 1 million men, which means that the war likely won't be over soon. Whether or not Ukraine does exceptionally well as far as fighting, this will be dragged out much longer than this winter if there's an extra 1 million soldiers coming from the other side.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm wondering, how do you see the difference between documentary photography and war photography? Because you just explained that it was the first time for you going into the war field. How do you assess?
I think that it's the same thing, just a different subject matter. We're supposed to conduct ourselves in the same manner while there, and it's our job to, as accurately as possible, show what's happening on the ground. And for me, the reason for doing that is to better inform people back at home and abroad on why this is happening and what they could potentially do about it. One example is in the United States, we have elections coming up at the beginning of next month, and the United States is sending billions and billions of dollars to this country on the other side of the world. And a lot of the folks that are running for office are using this as like, why are we doing this? We could be spending this money at home. And to me, I'm doing a job that helps inform people on why it is. And it's up to the viewer, the subscriber, to decide, do they think that we should be partaking in this? Do they think that we need to be sending money when we could spend it on our own infrastructure, on our own hospitals, on whatever it is at home? And that's sort of my purpose for that.
Will you make another documentary, or will you continue working as a war photojournalist? I mean, what are your future plans?
For the next 2 months, as soon as I wrap up, I'm doing a safety training here in Ankara with Anadolu and Tika. As soon as I wrap that up on Saturday, I'll be heading back into Ukraine. I'll be there through middle of November, and past that, I'm not too sure. So for the short term, there's lots of stories to be told in Ukraine, and it's a very important subject in the world news right now. A lot of what's happening in the world is revolving around that at the moment. So I would like to continue to work there.
Thank you.
Merhaba, teşekkür ederiz öncelikle. Biz artık savaşın ekonomik, siyasi etkilerini zaten çok rahat görebiliyoruz. Bu fotoğraftan sonra kişiyle görüşebildiniz mi, Elena'yla, ve bundan sonraki süreçte bir yaşam hikayesi fotoğraflamayı düşünüyor musunuz?
We have already seen the economic and political effects of the war. Have you had a chance to see Olay after the war? And are you planning to write up a story about a human story?
So currently, no, I have not met with her. We have talked quite a bit over texting through WhatsApp or Viber, and I do plan on seeing her. She's currently in Krakow, and that's the reason that the two of us haven't met, that every time I go to Ukraine, I enter through Warsaw. It's logistically a little bit easier. But when I leave in November, I am planning to have an actual meeting with her that's longer than 30 seconds in a very traumatic moment. So yes, I am going to do an interview with her. We're going to take some photos and then just kind of hear about how each other's lives have been. I think it'll be a really special moment to get to have this one-on-one interaction.
Thank you. Any other question?
Whenever I listen to you, I always feel that you're inspiring because you do what you do with passion. So maybe you can talk a little bit about photography as a profession. Like, there are a lot of young people, maybe they can do this as a profession too. So for how long you have been shooting? Can they earn good amount of money if they take the risk?
Yeah, I mean, so I owe all of that to my mom. So my mom and dad, he's had passed when I was a kid though, but both of them are artists and had come from, my dad came from a family where his parents didn't support that. He was supposed to work. He was supposed to be a farmer or a businessman or something. And my mom came from a family where her dad was extremely supportive of whatever she wanted to do, as long as it's what makes you happy and you're fulfilled. So I grew up in a household where, as long as like what we're doing gave us pride, my mom's happy with that. If we wanted to go to college, that's fine. If we didn't want to go to university, that's not a problem, as long as you're doing something that like gives you a purpose in this world. And I've kind of carried that with me. Like I do this. I'm also like a mover at home, so you don't have to do just like one career path. You can have multiple things. Like I have a tiny little business moving people from one house to another with my little brother, and I like the act of like building and creating a small business like with a family member. As far as photography goes, for me, I'm very drawn to helping to tell other people's stories, mainly in the spot news sphere where it's that day, what's happening. The act of getting to inform an audience is something that, this is different for everyone, there's a million different types of photography, but getting to inform the masses or whatever, how big or small your audience is, and get to have the conversations with people and like better educate them, and really myself through this. Like my main reason for going to Ukraine was that I wanted to better understand this conflict and the history of the people there and like Slavic culture. So I think the most important thing is like in my experience, I'm going to be most driven in areas that I'm curious about something. I have no interest in being a wedding photographer. There's a lot of different parts of the world with like different things going on that I don't have a huge interest in shooting. Like I don't particularly care about the supermoon when that comes out, or like shooting a red carpet event or basketball or something like that. I don't think that I'm like necessarily drawn to war. I think that I wanted to learn more about this place in the world and experience that culture and hopefully learn enough about it that I can effectively contribute to the storytelling from that region. So as long as it's something that you are passionate about and you really want to learn about, I think that's the most important thing. If you want to learn more about a subject and you want to be better at it, the photos and your career and everything else will follow. And hopefully you can monetize it, but if you don't have, photography doesn't have to be the sole thing. There's a lot of photographers in the world that they go and they take photos of something, but then they have a normal job on the side. Many people do that. So it doesn't have to just be like one thing or another. As long as like at the end of the day you feel that what you're doing has purpose for you, that's number one.
Would you serve or would you publish any photo which would make Ukraine look in a negative image?
I haven't really run into a lot. There's photos that have come out of Russian soldiers that had been tortured. If I ran into that scene and I personally photographed that, I would have no problem publishing that because that's what's happening. And I think that it's not about making Ukraine look bad. I think that it's our job to show what's actually happening. And if there is something that Ukrainian soldiers were misconducting themselves, they should be held accountable. And I think that for the international community, if there's billions and billions of dollars and arms flowing into this country, it's like you want that side to be on the right side. You want them to hold themselves to a standard that's higher than what we've all seen Russia's doing with like the bombing of civilian areas, the mass deportation of civilians. I think that it's very important to hold yourselves accountable, and I would have no issue doing that.
Thank you.
Any other question? No? Okay. Thank you for your speech, Wolfgang. Now I would like to invite Cihangir İşbilir. Okay. I would like to invite Cihangir İşbilir and Fırat Yurdakul to the stage to present his gift.
Do you want a photo of that?
Ben önce kendisine teşekkür ediyorum aramızda olduğu için. Bir iki cümlede ben bir şey söylemek istiyorum. Pek çok kişi bu fotoğrafın şans eseri kaydedilmiş olduğunu düşünebilir. Ama sahada bu işi yapmış olan insanlar gayet iyi bilirler ki bu yoğun çalışma ve gayretin aslında bir sonucudur. Wolfgang'ın çektiği özel bir fotoğraf bu ama bizim için en iyilerinden bir tanesi sadece. Pek çok buna benzer fotoğraf çekti ve dünya medyasında fotoğraflar yayınlandı. Kendisinin yoğun gayretinin ve emeğinin bir sonucu, şans eseri ortaya çıkmış bir fotoğraf değil. O yüzden kendisini tebrik ediyorum. Umarım bundan sonra kendisiyle uzun zaman çalışmaya devam ederiz. I said this picture was not taken by chance. This is hard working. Congratulations. Nice to meet you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Are we still
The
going?
gift is the establishment document of Anadolu Agency. Maybe you can show it. Okay. Thank you.